Professional wrestling and fighting games go hand in hand, just like peanut butter and jelly or someone's spinal cord and the pavement. So for the past 30 odd years, there have been all sorts of wrestlers in our favourite games. Many moons ago, I made a video covering Rumble Roses, a Japanese wrestling game focused specifically on the women's division. While not amazing, I thought it had a killer personality and fun if simple gameplay, so my thoughts were quite positive overall. A lot of time has passed since then, and with the resurgence of pro wrestlers in modern fighters, I thought it would be fun to hit the ring once again and explore its sequel, Rumble Roses XX. Found exclusively on the Xbox 360, XX introduces new features and locales, so I'm pretty interested in checking it out and seeing if it's made any improvements on its older sister. Also, as XX is the female chromosome in mammalian genealogy, smacking it on the box of an all-women's game makes perfect sense, while also just sounding really cool. XX, yeah! With the warm-up out of the way, join me on my quest to avoid demonetization as we pile-drive our way into the scantily clad world of Rumble Roses XX. After the original Rumble Roses released to a decent critical reception, I doubt that anyone expected a sequel would be released for next-generation hardware. But as we live in a peculiar realm where all sorts of wacky stuff happens, a series continuation was commissioned by Konami. Official sales figures for Reiko and Friends' first outing were never released publicly, but after scouring through Konami's 2004 financial reports, it seems that the company's profits shot up after a slow start to the fiscal year, although overall profits were still down a bit from 2003. Developed in tandem with Yuke, the studio behind most WWE games, the next Rumble Roses was expected by fans to keep what made the first game so much fun and simply expand on it rather than reinvent the wheel, but the development team had other thoughts, more on that later. By now in my videos, I would give you an ocean of development information and we would all live happily ever after, but for one reason or another, the details surrounding XX's creation are extremely scarce. Aside from an archived IGN article featuring an interview with producer Araki Uchida, there's not much to find, so we're gonna have to stretch this information as far as it can go. When designing the character models and animations of the first Rumble Roses, Yuke pushed the poor PS2 to its limits, with a reported 10,000 polygons being poured into each fighter. After their work was completed, the team looked into developing a sequel for the original Xbox, but at this point in time, the Xbox 360 and its far superior specs were about to hit the scene, so the first 7th generation console was chosen as XX's home. What I find interesting is that even though Uchida admits that the PS3 was more powerful on paper, the 360 boasted superior online functionalities, and as Yuke wanted fans to play online with each other, going with the Red Ring of Death was preferred. Adding to this is that there were certain ideas and gameplay concepts slated for the first game that were removed because of technical limitations, although the 360's shiny 512MB of RAM was all that was needed to finally realize these ideas. For the game's realistic visuals, a blend of motion capture and traditional hand animation was incorporated to bring these characters to life, as if you go too far in either direction, things can look a bit stiff and uncanny. On the topic of visuals, XX's sex appeal is an important component of the series' identity, with a blend of sexy and cool being desired by the character designers. Uchida explains that you can't get too risque with outfits and mannerisms as to not reduce the game to smut, and there's also age restriction things going on in the background, but you still want to have that rowdy energy that gets the crowd moving. As such, extra attention went into the cloth physics and lighting of the title's more exaggerated outfits, and I've gotta say, it all looks really nice, even if half of them would get me kicked out of the house.
You winning, son?
Anyway, remember what I said earlier about the developers wanting to keep the series fresh by reinventing the wheel? Well, this relates to XX's gameplay formula and a lack of a story mode, which, by the way, was awesomely terrible in the first game. Instead of putting all that time, money, resources, and short-term life decisions involving alluring women into another campaign mode, Yuke opted to scrap it entirely and solely focus on their core gameplay loop. With the PS2, we really couldn't give more individuality to the characters in terms of gameplay. They may have looked different, but they might not have fought all that differently. Each character has a specific fight style, and we wanted to make sure that they feel accurate to those styles. Also, the AI has been boosted to give it emotions. One character might act belligerent, while another might be more of a coward, things like that. You'll also see chemistry amongst characters, where two women may get along and work well as a team, while another two might have contrasting personalities and fight amongst themselves. I don't think there has really been this type of psychology in fighting games up to this point. Character relationships impacting a battle was actually done years before Rumble Roses in the first Tekken Tag tournament, but I'll let this one slide just for you, Candy Cane. With all of this information surely making you and I more valued members of society, the most important aspect to keep in mind going forward is that Yuke wanted to identify the major gripes players had with their first outing and either remove or improve on them for the sequel. The rise in development costs for HD-era games crippled many mid-level Japanese studios, with even the big dogs making some mistakes when trying to adapt to a Western market, so Rumble Rose's XX had to succeed. If it didn't, not only Yuke would lose money, but so would Konami, and you know what happens when they get upset? That's right, they force your IP into a pachinko machine. As with all wrestling games, your goal is to knock the opponent's lights out via a 3-count pinfall or submission. Every character has buttons for strikes, grabs, pinfalls, runs, and blocks, with none of it feeling too complicated for newer players. As Rumble Roses was designed to be more of a party game than a hyper-competitive fighter, the control scheme is kept accessible on purpose, and it felt quite intuitive as I picked up XX for the first time. The most basic strategy is to mash the attack button for a combo, which can then be continued with follow-up attacks when the opponent falls over. However, if they press block and strike as your move connects, they'll grab your attack and reverse it. If this happens, you'll be open for counterattack, so you have to watch out. Players with strong reads and reactions can make great use of reversals against mash-happy players who just want to wail on their enemy, and it reminds me a lot of Dead or Alive's triangle system. If you manage to avoid being reversed, you'll notice that making contact with certain body parts will lead to them appearing on the HUD, with this tying into battle damage. Over the course of a match, a fighter's head, body, arms, and legs can be individually damaged, weakening them over time. There are even grappling techniques that target one of these 4 areas, and it's up to you to determine which body part you want to pursue. For example, if your opponent loves to run around and perform strong kicks, targeting their legs would be the play. On the topic of grapples, you can input these when standing upright, and your opponent's position will change their animation. When up close and personal, press any direction on the D-pad in conjunction with your grapple button to follow through with your initial grab. This is a crucial Rumble Roses mechanic, and it's mostly how you'll be putting severe pressure onto specific areas. Since grounded opponents have limited defensive options, it's wise to grab them here, as if your attacks aren't being broken, you can loop pressure sequences. Other mechanics include leaving the ring, equipping weapons, and even hyping up the crowd with a right stick. These aren't necessary to win a bout, but they go a long way in making XX feel like an authentic wrestling experience, and it's always fun to get the audience pumped before you pummel on the enemy. By now, you may have noticed a meter system lurking at the top of the screen, with this being responsible for killer moves. With at least one bar, press the super button to perform a cinematic attack that downs the enemy, and if they're in a specific position, this becomes a lethal move. Allowing strong attacks like these to be performed at the press of a button ensures equal access for players of all skill levels, which I'm actually a fan of. With how Rumble Roses has fully 3D movement, performing a traditional motion input for supers would get all weird as it would overlap with mobility options, and I feel that it would be counterintuitive when you take the game's party mode nature into consideration. It's important to note that killer moves can be reversed during their startup cutscene, preventing players from having access to a one-button super with zero counterplay. This phenomenon applies to humiliation moves too, which can begin when a fighter's humiliation meter is maxed out. These result in a submission where the victim has to button mash in order to escape, but the initiator can freely move the camera around for different views of the action. I don't think I've ever seen interactive camera movement during a super in a fighting game before, so this gets points for creativity. These are all the mechanics taken from the first Rumble Roses, but to spice things up a bit, XX introduces tag team battles. As previously mentioned, character relationships impact how cohesive their fighting styles will be, and you can even see how they view each other during their entrance. In addition to freely tagging in and out when at the ring's corners, your team can perform tag throws and even special supers with the right character combinations. One of my favorites is Miss Spencer and Sister A's double stretch, as it involves both of them performing a simultaneous submission. When paired with the great sound design of bones crunching and muscles being torn, it makes for a wince-inducing experience. Different teams have their own animations, so it pays off to experiment with all sorts of fighter combinations to see what works for you. Returning to my earlier points about party games for a bit, I really feel that Yuke did a great job at designing a game that can be enjoyed by demographics with wildly different expectations. Think of it like this: you know how there are die-hard wrestling fans who know every storyline, upset, and heel turn throughout the sport's history? Well, there are plenty of fans who are more entry-level with their appreciation, meaning that they're only familiar with the big names and stuff that's currently happening. Rumble Roses is similar, with the hardcore wrestling game fans being able to practice reversal timings, meter build optimization, and how best to damage certain limbs, whereas the casual fans who just want some fan service can button mash to their heart's content and still be able to have a lot of fun. In a general sense, attempting to appeal to everyone can lead to a product failing to find an audience once it's been shipped to market. But the way I see it, XX's blatant sex appeal and carefree attitude means that it can, in theory, find a home within the 18 to 30-something male demographic. With responsive yet simple gameplay out of the way, what kind of modes are there? Well, I'm glad you asked. The first Rumble Roses aforementioned story mode has been sent to the ER, and to replace it comes a myriad of smaller options. With how overwhelmed I was browsing through the menu screen for the first time, I'll cover the game's modes in order so we're not confused. After finishing a basic tutorial, XX's Get Up involves selecting your favorite character and progressing through a series of battles in one of 3 areas. Eventually, you'll earn the opportunity to participate in a title match, granting you the title of singles champion should you win. There's a nice mix of single and tag team battles along the way, and you can even earn in-game currency, but overall it's nothing I haven't seen before. Wrestling the CPU over and over and over becomes super repetitive, and even though the first game's campaign mode was a glorified arcade ladder, it made frequent use of fully voice-acted cutscenes just to provide some backstory. Exhibition mode is where you can freely choose from a variety of battle types, ranging from normal fights to street fights to 4-player free-for-alls. Some of these are very similar to each other, but look, I'm not going to be mad at extra modes, especially if it lets me do an old-fashioned street fight. Instead of winning via a pinfall, you now aim to deplete your opponent's health bar, much like a traditional fighting game. The run button has been turned into a forward dash, and there are even high damage launches into juggle combos. Plus, everything feels much more visceral when performed on concrete, and I think something like this would cause major brain damage. Handicap matches are up next, and they pit a team of 2 against a lone wrestler. If one of the team members is pinned, they both lose, so you have to coordinate with your team member in order to keep going, whereas 3- and 4-way royals are slugfests with next to no rules. Whoever successfully pins one of the fighters first emerges victorious, and with how you can be attacked from all sorts of angles at any given moment, playing defensively and watching your back is crucial. The final match type is Queen's matches, where the Roses battle each other on the beach, as well as setting a humiliating penalty for the loser. There are 26 of these to choose from, and they range from doing the limbo to getting shot by a water gun. It's quite obvious that some of these play into the more titillating aspects of Rumble Roses, and with how revealing some of these outfits can be, I can imagine the developers had fun animating them. Jokes aside, this is actually a pretty cool feature, and it's nice to see the animators flex their skills for something non-combat related. You can even view these penalty animations on their own in the locker room, which is sort of the game's hub area. In addition to switching out fighters and tag partners for singles champion progression, it's possible to change their outfits, take photos of said outfits, and even change their physique. Taking a page out of DOA's book, the coveted bust slider is front and center within character customization, as well as a few other sliders too. More importantly though, there are many outfits for you to choose from, although you'll have to use your career mode points to purchase them in the shop. Swimsuits, penalty animations, artwork, and a lot more need to be bought using credits, with the grind not being for the faint of heart. Scrolling through a guide I found online almost made my head explode, so for those of you who love earning in-game content over a long period, definitely check this game out, you'll be invested forever. Before we move on, it's important to note that XX lets you create your own fighter. You can change her real name, ring name, theme music, fighting style, etc., so it's actually not too bad. Okay, don't get me wrong, it's not on the level of something like Soul Calibur for example, but I appreciate the developers trying something new for Rumble Roses. The final mode is online play, but as I'm on a modded 360, I can't test this out, although I have heard that the netcode was shocking. An old post on GameFAQs claims that there was a patch to improve netplay, but I still can't imagine it would have been amazing, what with it using 2006 delay-based netcode, ouch. On paper, there's a lot of content here to keep players invested, which is obviously a good thing, but I found myself getting bored as I went along. In my view, XX's repetitive content is its biggest weakness, as there are only so many times I can fight the CPU before wanting to do something else. I wouldn't say that any of these modes are bad or poorly made or anything along those lines, but if you're not super dedicated to the item grind, then you're gonna get bored. On that fateful release day in 2006, Rumble Roses XX took the gaming world by storm, forcing every major review outlet into submissions of positive press along the way. Is what I would be saying if we lived in a better world, because the game actually received a very similar reception to its predecessor. XX sits at a decent 62 on Metacritic, and after browsing through various reviews, I realized that there's a common sentiment shared by all of the publications. Although the game isn't poorly made, it doesn't do anything that hasn't been seen before within the wrestling genre, and its focus on casual gaming led to a lack of long-term game depth. Every review I can find kinda averages out to somewhere between a 5 to a 7 out of 10, so the reception wasn't very great. I doubt Konami was happy. A little bit further down the line, Siliconera reported that XX's Japanese sales figures were strong enough to warrant its acceptance into the Platinum Collection, the Eastern version of discounted greatest hits games, but no such honor would be found in the West. I searched high and low for breadcrumbs of Western sales information, but I just wasn't able to find anything, even after going through Konami's 2006 financial report. It's no secret that the Xbox brand has always played second fiddle to PlayStation and Nintendo hardware in their home country of Japan, with the Xbox 360 failing to break this curse. In fact, Kotaku reported that the top 50 best-selling 360 games in 2007 sold a combined total of 1.8 million copies, with XX's 29,187 units resulting in 18th place. Aside from a Japanese poll asking gamers about their favorite Xbox heroines, where Reiko actually came in 4th, so not bad, certain songs from the game being available in Japanese karaoke bars, and Reiko's appearance in Metal Gear Online on PS2, the Rumble Roses IP once again failed to break into the mainstream and slowly withered away. All that came after XX was a mobile pinball spin-off game and Xbox One backwards compatibility, which is actually pretty cool. But none of these fighters have been spotted throwing down in a new game since XX's release nearly 20 years ago. Yeah, that's how long it's been. Personally, for as much as I really love the women's wrestling action the series provides, there's no shot of it returning in the current era of video games. Firstly, Rumble Roses is far too sexualized, so there would probably be a headache-inducing worth of controversy for Yuke and Konami. And secondly, the franchise doesn't have the global popularity needed to resurrect a long-dormant IP. Going back to what I said earlier about Japanese studios struggling in the HD era of games, development costs have shot up exponentially since then, making big-budget video games even more of a financial risk. If a third Rumble Roses were to hypothetically release in the present day, it would need to have 4K visuals, a plethora of single-player content, solid online netcode, competitive features, and a long-term content model, which may sound like the bare minimum for modern games, but do you really think Konami is going to greenlight this idea? I have my doubts, which really sucks, because I would love to see these characters rendered with greater graphical fidelity than ever before. Rumble Roses definitely isn't for everyone, but it has so much soul and charisma that I just don't see in modern wrestling games. With that said, a new Dead or Alive game was announced the day that I started recording this video, so maybe that can fill the void. Putting all of that aside, it's a real shame that XX failed to resonate with a wider audience, as had it performed better, I have no doubts that Great Khan would have destroyed Makoto going forward. So, what did we learn today? Honestly, not much, but I still had loads of fun messing around with Rumble Roses combat systems once again. XX assuredly isn't one of the best fighting games I've ever played, but I can't deny that it has genuine heart and attention to detail, reminding me of when I would rent games from the video store after school as a kid. For that reason alone, the game has a spot in my good books, and being able to perform all sorts of unbelievable wrestling techniques is the cherry on top of the sundae. If you've never played Rumble Roses before and you're interested in checking it out, I don't believe it's too hard to emulate these games on PC if you don't have access to an Xbox 360 or Xbox One or whatever they're called now, I can't keep up. The bottom line is that while it's not going to blow your mind with innovative gameplay mechanics, XX is still good fun in short bursts, especially if you can sit on the couch with friends and virtually beat each other up. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you and your time, and I hope you had fun. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.